few videos ago, I converted a Stormcast into a Dark Souls aesthetic. I was really pleased with how he came out, so today I'm converting 2 more Stormcasts to a Dark Souls aesthetic, specifically the 2 other members of his trio of Stormcast. I decided to start on Hungerad, the one female Stormcast of the trio. Unlike my previous conversion, I really liked her stance and wanted to try to keep as much of it as possible. Just as with my previous conversion though, I snipped off her pauldrons and Roman skirt. Later I would replace it with ragged chainmail, just like I had my first Stormcast. Another easy element to replace was this sheathed dagger she has at her waist. I snipped off the handle, then the sheath, then carved off the rest, and replaced it with this one from the Putrid Blight King's kit. It's just a little more grim dark, a little more gritty and medieval. This pair of pauldrons are actually from the Bestigor kit. One of the things about Stormcast is they exhibit a really high level of sexual dimorphism. The women are much slimmer than the men, and so finding pauldrons that fit was actually a little bit difficult, where for my first Stormcast it had been pretty easy. This is a breastplate from a third-party company called Anvil Industries. It's been grown twice in size and is roughly the correct scale for Hungerad. Much like for my first Stormcast, I thought switching the breastplate would give the Stormcast a much darker, gothic feel. The problem though is that her original stance is dependent on her breastplate being 2 different pieces, an ab section and a higher chest portion, which allows her to twist to the side a little. The breastplate I wanted to replace with it though is a single piece. You can see the problem really clearly here, and how stiff her stance would look if I just added her arms to this new breastplate. My solution proved to be extremely fiddly. I took my scalpel and cut down the middle of her torso between the upper plate and the bottom plate. With the 2 pieces separated, I carefully matched the bottom portion of her torso to the exact angle of the original. I glued it in place, shaved down just a touch of the upper edge so it would fit organically under the upper portion of her armor, then glued the upper half to the bottom half and used green stuff to hide the gap between. The end result looked pretty seamless. It may not seem like a huge change, but it really changes the entire character of the model, giving her a much more grim and rough around the edges look. Unlike my previous Stormcast, where I changed both of his arms, for Hungerad I wanted to keep her originals, so I snipped them from her old torso. They fit the new torso well, and means her dynamic stance is back in place. These are the tassets from a different Stormcast kit. While I mostly shied away from using other Stormcast parts for these Dark Souls Stormcast, in this case I felt like the script on them gave her an ancient look, especially if they were painted correctly. Speaking of Stormcast parts, I replaced the shield she originally comes with one from a Beastman kit. It doesn't super make sense she'd be using a wooden shield when she's armored, but in general if you're in heavy armor you don't use a shield anyway, so we'll just let it go. In this case, I liked the rough-hewn look of the spikes, and that it also gave her a bit of the edge of the strange pagan forest creature that my first Stormcast had. It was time to replace the hammer that she originally comes with. The front runner was this pick from, again, the Putrid Blight King's kit. Unfortunately, it's a little bit out of scale with her, just a little too big and chunky. Oversized weapons give models a kind of cartoony feel, and that wasn't what I wanted for this Stormcast, who was supposed to be slim and lethal, and a little sinister. I did have other options though. This is the war pick from a Skaven kit. It's gothic and kind of dark without being exactly chaosy, and like I talked about with my first Dark Souls Stormcast, that's a lot of the vibe I was going for. It's also of a much more appropriate scale than the Putrid Blight King's one. The third contender was this jagged blade from the Putrid Blight King's kit. I liked the story it told of a sword so old that the rust had eaten away at the edge. Another nice thing about it is that it comes with an included fist, and the angle of it is a little bit more extreme than her hammer had been held at, emphasizing the follow-through of her stance. The helmet I had given her is the same one I had for my first Dark Souls Stormcast, though this time dehorned. Combined with the blade, it looked good, but I didn't love it, so I made a few changes. I rehorned her helm and changed her blade to another sword from the Putrid Blight King's kit. The reason for this is it's a little less jagged, and the angular lines of it look archaic, a relic of an ancient time. For my third Dark Souls Stormcast, I started out by doing all the same things I had for my first 2, which meant cutting off the pauldrons and the Roman skirt. This third one I believe is called Oberon, and he's wielding a massive hammer in a cool 2-handed stance where he's walking forward. This is actually my second time converting this model into a Dark Souls Stormcast. I had previously done it about 2 years ago, but lost all the footage. Still, I remembered most of the steps. First, I sliced his torso from his waist. The reason for this is that my vision of him was as an unnaturally tall warrior stalking through the forest. And also, because as I've talked about before, I hate how squat and short Stormcast torsos are. To give him a new spine, I used this spare piece of sprue. Considering how expensive Warhammer is, it's always nice when you can make conversions a little cheaper. It doesn't look like a huge difference, but when you're dealing with models at this scale, even a few millimeters can make quite an impact. This is from the waist of a putrid Blight King. I thought it would be a good piece to slot under his chest plate and hide some of the blank space that had been left by enlarging him and cutting off his Roman skirt. Before slotting it in though, I decided to replace it with the same breastplate I had for my first Dark Souls Stormcast. Again, it's very jagged and gothic, and fits the look I was going for. Because casting is more of an art than a science, it's a little smaller than the one I used for my first Stormcast, but that actually helps to accentuate this Stormcast's unnatural height and slimness of build. I slotted the armor and chainmailed beneath the breastplate, and added one hip tassel. I really only added that one because there was a weird gap on that hip, and I didn't add one to the other side because, as I said, I wanted him to be unnaturally tall and gaunt, and anything that broadened his silhouette would hurt that impression. I also gave him a pair of pauldrons from the Blight King's kit. Through all these changes, I'd made sure that the forearms of his warhammer could still match his elbows, because I really do like his initial stance and the way he's holding his weapon. This is the ginormous cleaver from some Death Guard kit. It's jagged and rusted and pitted, and actually I thought would make for a pretty good replacement of the warhammer. Because it was a 40k bit though, it needed to be detechified before it could be added to my Stormcast. I snipped off the cable on the back, and the little box transistor thing that all power weapons have, and also the little nodes that run from it to attach to the blade. Using a paper clip, I connected cleaver to haft. Whereas with Hungerad, I'd been careful not to give her too large of a weapon, here the enormous cleaver really worked and gave him a great sense of personality. The executioner of the group slowly descending through the trees to take his toll in heads. Finally, for a head, I gave him the same antlered helm as I had my first Dark Souls Stormcast, and you can see that it's a lot more proportional, actually adding to his gaunt height and silhouette. And with that, 2 more Stormcasts have been Dark Soulsified. I think they complement really well my first Dark Souls Stormcast conversion. All 3 have kind of the same aesthetic language, dark, gaunt, pagan creatures that stalk through the forest. Though I don't currently have a plan for one, in the future I'd like to make more Dark Souls type Stormcast, though with a different aesthetic language this time. Still grim and dark, but not quite as foresty. If you have any ideas for what you'd like to see in Dark Souls Stormcast, let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and hit the like button or check out some of my other conversions.